I think that what differentiates this market from anything I've ever seen, Ivan, and I've been doing this now for almost 36 years, is the amount of physical demand that is being accumulated. Now, we've talked at length about the central banks that have been buying gold. We're seeing action with the central banks buying silver. Now, of course, it started with Russia saying they were going to add it to their stockpile.
Andy Schectman says after nearly 4 decades in this business, he's never seen anything like what's happening with silver right now. Russia just did something historic, he warns. For the first time ever, a government openly added silver to its state reserves. And almost immediately, China followed, not just on paper, but by flying teams to Latin America, to Peru and Mexico, buying doré and concentrate directly from miners, paying more than the West offers, and taking it home for refining. Andy calls this a deliberate playbook. And it isn't just Russia and China. Saudi Arabia is buying massive blocks of SLV, a product he calls one of the worst for retail. But they're big enough to actually stand for delivery and drain London vaults. India? They just imported a record 1,700 metric tons in a single quarter, the biggest silver haul in more than a decade. At the same time, global solar demand has exploded. Electric vehicle production is surging, and Comex inventories are hitting multi-year lows. Andy says, this isn't a coincidence. This is coordination.
First time I've ever seen a government do that. And then it mitigated or moved towards China. Talking to guys like Sean Kuhn from Dolly Varden, he says, look, Andy, the Chinese, who are the second largest producer in the world, they told David Morgan they're the first, by the way, but needless to say, they're massive producers. Sean says they're flying all around Latin America, in particular places like Peru, even all the way up to Mexico, and pulling metal out of the ground before it's even called silver. They're buying doré, they're buying concentrate. They're paying double what the West will do to disintermediate the whole market, sending it back to China for refining. So you have the first or second largest producer in the world finds it significant enough to fly around the world and buy doré and concentrate right out of the ground from the miners, directly from the miners, and then sending it back to do so under the cover of anonymity, so to speak. No one really knows how much they're buying or what they're getting, but Sean can validate that is indeed what is happening. You look at the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia, disappointing as it may be that they bought huge amounts of SLV, maybe one of the worst products I've ever seen ever in my career, because just as a side note, the short position right now in SLV is 53.97 million shares,
Wow.
which is it's grotesque, it's ridiculous. And remember what the prospectus said, BlackRock said, there could come a time when there's not enough silver to cover those short positions, buyer beware. But the point is, we're seeing lots of silver that is being accumulated by the central banks. What is really different to me, as far as I'm concerned, is the amount of silver that is coming into the Comex. And, last week I jotted down some numbers. In month to date in September, the number of contracts, and this was last week, I'm sure it's much more now, that stood for delivery was 10,599 contracts. Let's do the math real quick. 10,599 contracts times each contract weight being 5,000 ounces is 52,995,000 ounces. We'll multiply that, let's just call it by 42. That's $2,225,790,000 worth of silver has come into Comex in the first week or so of the month. And this is what we've seen over and over and over again. The point I want to get across here is that when you have countries, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, let's not forget about India, who's bought somewhere between 600 and 800 million ounces over the last 5 years. That's more than is on the Comex and the LBMA combined. And now you see it happening in the United States. At this level, the people don't just have the most money that are standing for delivery. Now, when we say stand for delivery, mind you, this is going into Comex. A lot of it leaves. A lot of it doesn't leave. So regardless if it's leaving Comex or being put into an eligible account, not registered, meaning it's not available for sale, it's going into strong hands, to this degree, these people are not only the most well-funded traders on the planet, i.e. the central banks, the commercial banks, the very sophisticated traders that can stand for delivery on Comex to the tune of billions of dollars every month since November, since the election, but they're also the most well-informed.
Andy explains, look, this isn't retail speculation. This is the biggest, smartest money in the world. Central banks, sovereign funds, commercial banks, standing for delivery month after month. And that tells you they know what's coming. He points to September's Comex deliveries, more than 10,500 contracts, nearly 53 million ounces, worth over $2.2 billion. And most of that silver isn't moving back into circulation. It's going into eligible accounts, locked away, never to return to the market. At the same time, Andy warns that SLV carries a short position of nearly 54 million shares. BlackRock admits in its own prospectus that there could come a day when there isn't enough silver to cover those shorts. Buyer beware, Andy says. For retail, SLV is a dead end. But Saudi Arabia? They buy in size, they can redeem, they can pull the metal. That's a different game. And while the public sees a flashing spot price on their screens, Andy says price itself has become a tool of misdirection. The BRICS are using it against the West. They suppress the price here, Andy explains, then buy the real thing over there. That's 3D chess. We're playing checkers. Outside data backs up Andy's warning. India's imports have outpaced global supply growth. The solar industry alone is forecast to consume over 200 million ounces of silver this year, and EV manufacturers are competing for the same metal. Meanwhile, global inventories on Comex and LBMA are sliding lower every month. Andy says, this is the quiet part of a reset. The price you see today isn't the value of silver. It's your last chance before the world wakes up.
And I think that's the most important thing to understand, is that the people at this level who swim in circles of 9-figure monthly acquisitions are not doing things just for kicks. They're doing it because they understand where we are going. They know the playbook. They are at the highest level of information. And that's what I take away from really where we're at this moment, is that price is relevant, but price is a tool of misdirection, allowing the big money to position before all of the people that you and I call friends outside of what we do for a living, talking about this stuff. The people who may be very smart, very bright, very well read, arguably just reading the wrong shit. And that's the problem. So most of the public has zero idea that there is a massive drive going on for gold and for silver in terms of delivery. Just as a side note, in the first 5 days or so, 6 days of the September contract, which is a non-delivery month, 3,626 gold contracts and 100 ounces apiece stood for delivery. So you're talking $1.5 billion there too.
Wow.
So in just the first week of September, you're seeing nearly $4 billion worth of metal stand for delivery. But this is what we've seen every single month. Now, we've always been an importer of silver, not always been, in fact, never, to my knowledge, been a net importer of gold. Both of them together signal a bigger move, a bigger trend, and that is that the smartest money in the world understands that there is a rush for physical acquisition of metal, bypassing the paper promises. So there you go, crazy times, brother, and I think we're just beginning in silver. The only saving grace is, and maybe I would like to think they're not misinformed. See, if you and I bought SLV, we can never take possession. They can, because it's the amount that they purchased. You have to have a certain amount, and it's called a basket. If you are able to redeem a basket, which I don't know the exact amount, 20, 30, 40, $50 million worth, they can. So I'll give you an example. Kyle Bass, when he was running the fund for the Texas Teachers Union years ago, they bought, if I'm not mistaken, $1 billion worth of GLD. They stood for delivery. Saudi Arabia can do the same thing here. They do have the right to stand for delivery, and most of that metal, if I'm not mistaken, is held in the LBMA. So because they bought such a significant amount, they can stand for delivery. And maybe they had a reason behind doing that I'm not sure. For you and I, buying SLV is as dumb as a mud wall. Not only do you pay the capital gains for collectibles when you sell it, you can never take possession. It's custodied by JP Morgan and BlackRock. Of course, JP Morgan, as we have identified multiple times, paid the largest fine that the Justice Department had ever handed out at that point, $920 million or so, for manipulating the silver market. And,
They
you
don't they
know,
don't
I
call
just
it
think,
manipulating. They call it spoofing, Andy.
right. Well, and that was kind of, you know, and the reason that I think that they got off so easily, I believe that this was done at the behest of the central bank, who gave them the green light to do this. And there are bigger reasons at play for holding down the monetary metals, but that's for another discussion. Simply to say, it was far more. In fact, you could argue that it you know, was far, far, far more than just spooking. It was manipulation, and you know, it was at one point thought it would be RICO charges, because in essence it's, you know, like the hitman kills someone, well, they can go after the mob boss because the mob boss ordered it. Well, the point of it is that who up the chain of JP Morgan understood this? Is it just the head trader, Michael Nowak, who was the sacrificial lamb that was put in jail for a couple of years? Or, you know, I don't know. The point
Right.
of it is that this is something that you can only manipulate a market, Ivan, for an extended period of time by pushing it in the direction that it is going. And I've been doing this for almost 36 years. Most of the time, the world didn't want gold and silver. They wanted U.S. bonds and U.S. stocks and real estate. They wanted what was, you know, when things got scary, there was a rush to the dollar. What is happening now is that the big money around the world has become motivated, coordinated, and sophisticated, and they understand what's happening. The big money around the world largely being, when I say that, I'm talking the BRICS countries, in particular Russia, China, now Saudi Arabia, India. All of these countries understand, and they have been using the spoofing or the manipulation or the suppression of the metals market against us. In other words, hold the paper price down in the West and then go all around the world and drain the supplies, especially off of exchanges around the globe that don't affect the price. The price is set in the West, so if you smash the price down on paper here and then buy it up there, and there, boy, that works out well. And they're smart enough to see the big picture. That's what they're doing. And then they go as far, and just ask yourself, the second largest producer of silver in the world, the largest producer of gold, don't sell an ounce. They fly all over the world and buy gold and silver in doré, which is a crudely refined bar, in concentrate, which is a byproduct of it, right from the miners, which completely disintermediates the amount and disintermediates the market and the commercial banks. They're thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. They're playing 3D chess, we're playing checkers. So I think that this is something that is being used against us without saying so. They get it. I'll evidence it this way. You know, I've spent a lot of time talking about the BRICS, and the BRICS grain exchange is something that is under development. And I listened to an interview about the guy who's running it a year ago, and he said, you know, we here in the BRICS produce and consume in the global south more wheat than they do in the West. Yet we have no control over its price because that is controlled on Comex. But with the development of the BRICS grain exchange, that will change. Now,
Wow.
you know, they understand what we're doing with the precious metals, with the base metals. All of the things that we have suppressed for various reasons are now being used against us. It's jiu-jitsu, the premise being you use your opponent's leverage against them. And this is exactly what's
Absolutely.
happening right now, man.
So Andy asks, if Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and India are all hoarding silver like it's a reserve currency, what does that tell you? Do you think silver is just another commodity? Or is it being positioned as part of a new monetary system? And the bigger question, what are you going to do while the window is still open? Andy warns, history shows us that when the public finally catches on, it's always too late. The strongest hands are already in place. If this gave you perspective, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Andy believes we are at the very beginning of a global monetary reset, and staying informed may be the most valuable decision you make this year.